Good morning. The road to Emmaus. From our reading, we join the two followers of Jesus on their journey home to Emmaus, a small village a few miles south of Jerusalem. As they travelled, they reflected on the terrible events of the past 3 days. And verse 15 tells us that Jesus joined them and walked with them, but divine intervention stopped them from recognising their Lord. Verse 17, the Lord asked them, "What are you talking about?" And at this they stood still, unbelieving what Jesus had said, and their faces were downcast. The one called Cleopas replied, "Are you only a visitor to Jerusalem and do not know the things that have happened there?" "What things?" Jesus asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priest and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. In other words, the long-awaited Messiah of Israel. What is more, this is the 3rd day since all this took place. According to Jewish belief, the soul left the body on the 3rd day. Also, Jesus had told them that he would be resurrected on the 3rd day. In addition, Cleopas said, some of our women were amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said it would be, but they did not see him." The men were frightened for their lives. They were desolated that their Lord had been so brutally taken from them, and they were confused and lost. They had believed that Jesus was the Messiah of Israel, the one promised to them by God, who would be God's anointed servant, who would redeem and set Israel free. But they had seen their Lord, this amazing teacher, who spoke with them and had authority like no other, who healed the sick, fed thousands with a lunchbox and stopped a storm, delivered people from demons and raised the dead. Everybody in Jerusalem had heard how Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, as Bethany was only a few miles from Jerusalem. Yet the Jewish leaders had led Pilate to order Jesus' crucifixion. All their hopes were gone. The scriptures told them that Jesus was cursed by God as he was hung on a tree. How then could he have been the Messiah of Israel? Where was God in all of this? Why didn't God step in to help his son? Who would help them now that Jesus was dead? And what would happen to them now? This was the 3rd day. He was to rise from death, yet, it seemed, nothing had happened. Their despair and confusion cried out to Jesus. He loved them as he loves us, all his followers, including us. He wanted to comfort and encourage them and to stir up their faith by revealing himself to them. Today was his resurrection day. Death could not hold him. His grave was empty. And just as he had foretold in Luke 18:31-34, he said to his disciples, "We are going to Jerusalem, and everything that is written by the prophets about the Son of Man will be fulfilled. He will be turned over to the Gentiles. They will mock him, insult him, spit on him, flog him, and kill him." The disciples did not understand any of this, for its meaning was hidden from them, and they did not know what he was talking about. He had warned them many times of his death and sacrifice, but who he was, so empowered by God, blinded them to the truth contained in his words. And this was why they could not believe now what had happened to them. In verses 25 to 27, Jesus responded, "How foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. They continued on the road to Emmaus and asked Jesus to stay with them as the evening was upon them. They had a meal together, and Jesus took bread and he broke it and gave thanks and started to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. And they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" In verse 33, they got up and returned at once to Jerusalem, where they found the 11 disciples and those gathered with them. And they cried, "It's true! The Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon Peter." And then they explained all that had happened to them. In verse 36, while they were still talking about this, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." His first words, "Peace be with you." He wanted to reassure them that he was not a ghost, because of course his appearance was a bit of a shock. But he was alive, as he had promised them. He wanted to comfort them. 2 Corinthians 2:1, verse 3, Paul says this, "God is the Father of all mercies and the God of all comfort." In 2 Corinthians 7:6, he says, "But God, who comforts the downcast," and remember the 2 men were downcast and worried, "comforted us." He comforts the downcast. You see, God cares about our worries and concerns. He's a merciful, loving, and caring God. He knew the pain of his followers, and he wanted to comfort them, strengthen and empower them, to give them hope. In these difficult, sometimes very dark days in which we're living through, we too may find ourselves feeling like the disciples in some ways. We're all isolated. This is very hard to live with. We may have lots of questions to God as to why all this is happening and why he has not stepped in to stop it. Some may even be questioning their faith, as the 2 men were. So to this I would say, Jesus specifically went to meet these 2 men as he did the women at the tomb. They were just ordinary folk, yet Jesus met them first before the other disciples. Such was his concern to comfort them and reassure them that he was alive and his words and the prophecies were true. He wanted to strengthen their faith and give them hope for their present life and for their eternal future with him. Today, I believe he wants to do the same for us in our trials. He will never leave us or forsake us, it says in Deuteronomy 31:6. And Jesus reassures us, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." So let us, like his disciples, look to him and trust in him and rejoice, for our almighty, loving God is with us always, 24/7, and will never forsake us. He is our certain hope. Romans 15:13 says, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope and joy by the power of the Holy Spirit." May the Lord bless you and keep you always. Amen.